Hi, I'm Jimmy Butler, and welcome to the Agile Digest, where we have right-sized topics covered in just minutes. Today's topic is barely sufficient is the goal. It's about 6 minutes. Enjoy. If you're fairly new to Agile and Lean concepts, your head's probably about to explode when you hear things like barely sufficient is the goal. Or if you've listened to my previous digest around how exceeding expectations is wasteful, it probably goes against the grain of everything you know. Barely sufficient here is going to be in the context of documentation. The idea is that we want to be just good enough and no more to provide the need that we have. The key, though, is that it's sufficient. It is going to provide value, it's going to meet the need, but it's not going to be overkill and it's not going to be a lot of fluff. Because if people don't use it, if they don't reference it, it's not necessary. And even if they do reference a document you have, if only 20% of the document's what they're actually looking at, then you wasted your time creating the other 80%. So we want something that's quick to produce and maintain and is barely sufficient to meet the need. Let's look at release planning for a second. The graphic on this screen is representative of sticky notes on a board. And these sticky notes are arranged from epics down to the user stories. And those user stories are broken up into which release we're targeting the delivery of that work. And you can certainly overlay dates on here to give a better feel for what the schedule might look like. The question is that enough? Is that enough information for you to know what you're trying to accomplish and when? Would you call it barely sufficient? Does it suffice? When it comes to design and architecture, you could have 20, 30-page design documents that go into all sorts of detail. Okay, but what about this drawing? If we're getting started in a project and we want to get a high-level idea of what we're trying to accomplish and how it's going to be laid out, is this good enough to get started? Certainly, as the team develops and produces something, they can produce a little more detail in what they developed, but hey, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so think about it. Is this good enough to get started with? What about our layout requirements? This here is just a hand-drawn picture of what a particular page might look like in terms of what's laid out and where and what's on the page. Does it need to be fully fleshed out as some HTML or into some tool? Did we need to do any graphics? Is this good enough to convey what we're trying to accomplish with this page and the types of things that are on there? And in and of itself, there's a lot of requirements here, isn't there? You know, the types of capabilities that'll be there that you can then elaborate on later. And so this, I say, is good enough as a starting point to start creating other requirements from. What about the application flow and its capabilities? This here is just a hand-drawn flow of a mobile experience of a particular application. I see all types of capabilities popping out here. I need to be able to create accounts and log in and provide certain types of information in a form. I need to be able to add card information and be able to view information. A lot of requirements can be pulled out of this, but in one graphic, I can convey capabilities that I want, a flow that I want, field elements that I need, and then I can create user stories off of that. So do I need a big document to describe all this? Do I need to go out and actually do a prototype in the beginning to get a feel for it, or is this good enough to get started? In other presentations, I've used the term progressive elaboration. And basically what that means is you start with something very minimal, you learn from and experience it, and then you elaborate on it and you grow upon it. So in the very beginning, a hand-drawn sketch of what this screen might look like is probably a barely sufficient way to get started. The team knows what to start putting together. And then they can actually mock something up and then show that. And then you can get feedback from it and you can tweak it until you finally get to the final product. And so in the beginning, you didn't need to know what the full design was going to be. You don't even necessarily need to know what all the capabilities and requirements were going to be. You just needed something to get started with. You needed something that was barely sufficient. And when it comes to specific user requirements, Agile likes to use user stories. Now I have other digests that talk about what user stories are and how you write them. For the context of this presentation, just know that they're supposed to be short statements about somebody wants to do something and here's why, and here's a few acceptance criteria that need to be met in order for me to be happy. It's usually taught on index cards because index cards can only hold so much information. Now we often use online tools, same concepts apply. It's very barely sufficient information to give me just enough to say what's going on here, who's this for, what do they want, why do they want it, and what specifically do I need to make sure it's in it. It starts a conversation, it's barely sufficient information, but it's sufficient information to go off and build something that's useful. So just remember, what you document must be useful, not just now, but later. If you have documents sitting around that nobody ever references, you might want to wonder why you created them in the first place. And document as simply as possible to convey the meaning. We talked about user stories, for example. On something as small as an index card, I can convey enough information for a team to go off and build a capability. I didn't need pages of documentation. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Sometimes those drawings of what's on a page will be enough information to get started and then develop user stories from. These things can be put up on wikis, they can be put up on whiteboards, you can draw them on pieces of paper and take pictures of them. However you capture this information is fine, as long as the team has the opportunity to access it and use it, and that what you're creating is useful. So start with what you know and progressively elaborate. You don't always know all the details up front, that's why you start with pithy information. And remember, barely sufficient is always the goal, because we don't want waste and we don't want to create a lot of fluff that nobody reads, and we want to make sure that what we do create is easily found and useful for all. Well, that concludes this digest. I always welcome your feedback, so please email me at the email address on the screen. Thank you.